She tased your wife, Calum, in the middle of a hearing, and I'll do it again if she resists. That's what Marla Givens, interim president of the Turnwood Bluffs HOA, said as my wife collapsed on the polished laminate floor. And as if the title of this nightmare needed to be spelled out for the universe, she added, HOA compliance doesn't stop just because someone's pregnant. The taser was still crackling in her grip when Lyra's breath hitched and her knees buckled. The entire room froze. Every volunteer, every neighbor, every fake bailiff she'd forced into thrift store uniforms for her mock courtroom. But Marla didn't freeze. She walked, unbothered, smug, to the front of the room and lowered herself into the judge's chair like she'd earned the right to pass sentences. That's when I lifted my eyes to the ceiling and let my gaze lock onto the tiny black dome camera above her, because she had no idea the firmware inside that lens belonged to me. I wrote the code behind its blind spots. If someone forwarded you this clip, if you think HOA board meetings are about trash cans or lawn height, you should subscribe now. What you're seeing is the beginning. And I promise, it gets worse before it gets better. My name is Calum Drex. I design judicial surveillance systems for actual courts. Real judges, real evidence, real accountability. Not this circus Marla built inside our HOA's community center and called a hearing chamber. I recognized her entire setup the moment we walked in. A pirated version of my open-source courtroom simulator, butchered to mimic authority she didn't have. She used my tools to assault my wife, but the reason my hands didn't shake wasn't anger, it was purpose. Because I knew right then, I could tear her entire empire apart with the very code she stole. But you have to understand something before you judge why I didn't drag her out of that chair. This wasn't about a violation notice. It wasn't even about the taser. It was about what that moment cost Lyra. 2 weeks earlier, Marla issued a written HOA violation, claiming Lyra committed unauthorized passive surveillance. That's how she described my wife, 7 months pregnant, exhausted, trying to relieve back pain, glancing over a fence line during yoga. 1 glance, 1 second. And suddenly, my wife was labeled a threat to the community. Lyra laughed at first, but when the second notice came, with a mandatory disciplinary hearing, she stopped sleeping. Her doctor warned her stress levels were no longer safe. She tried meditation, warm baths, baking, anything to keep her blood pressure down. She didn't want to attend the hearing, but the summons threatened an escalation. So, we went. We walked straight into a performance. Marla had transformed the HOA meeting room into a theatrical courtroom. Judge's bench, gallery seats, overhead lights shaped like jury boxes. The kind of thing someone does when they were never accepted into law school but never let go of the fantasy. She wore a robe she bought online, a gavel she ordered engraved, and a smile sharp enough to cut through the air. We barely sat down before she accused Lyra of having an aggressive posture. Before Lyra could even respond, the taser was in Marla's hand. Electricity cracked, my wife's scream caught in her throat, and the whole room jolted except the person holding the weapon. And Marla, God help her, looked satisfied. Around us, people stood in horrified silence. The faux bailiff backed away. Desh Corin, the treasurer, stared at Marla like he'd just witnessed something he'd spend months trying to forget. But me, I stared at the camera. Because the moment Marla's robe brushed that judge's chair, she crossed into my world. In my world, every frame, every timestamp, every metadata trail leads back to the truth, and she had just committed the dumbest, most traceable act of her life under a system I built. Lyra was being lifted onto a stretcher when I made myself a promise. If Marla wanted to play judge, fine. I'd show her what a real courtroom looks like. Where are you watching from? Tell me below. Because if your HOA thinks they have power, wait until you see what happens when someone like me pushes back. The paramedics wheeled Lyra out through the same double doors we'd entered less than 10 minutes earlier, her head lolled to one side, her skin pale, belly strapped with monitoring leads. The taser had left a red web beneath her maternity blouse, the kind of mark that would fade in days, but the look in her eyes wouldn't. Marla didn't move. She stayed perched in the judge's chair, fingers laced over the gavel she had no right to wield. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes scanned the room like she expected applause. Like we were the ones on trial. One by one, the neighbors started shifting. Some stood in stunned silence. Others left quietly. No one helped, no one spoke. Not even Karen, who had flinched when the taser fired but now sat frozen in his treasurer's seat, fists clenched beneath the table. I didn't follow Lyra, not yet. Not because I didn't want to, but because I knew Marla. She'd used my wife as a statement. She wanted fear, compliance, obedience. The only thing she didn't expect was stillness. So I stood there, burning that ceiling camera's location into memory. Then I turned and walked out without a word. The HOA's mock courtroom was part of the community center, a refurbished boathouse on the edge of Silver Path Lake. It used to be where families held birthday parties, summer barbecues, or memorials. Now it was a stage, a set, a weapon. I passed the broken gavel sculpture at the main entrance, the one Marla had commissioned with HOA dues last year to represent community order. Its handle had cracked months ago during a storm. No one had bothered to fix it. That wasn't an accident. That was a metaphor. When I got to the hospital, they told me Lyra had stabilized, but she'd need observation for the night. Her heart rate had spiked. The baby's was irregular for the first 15 minutes, but it had returned to baseline. I sat by her side and counted every beep of the monitor like it was a drumbeat keeping the world from falling apart. When she finally woke up, she didn't ask about Marla. She didn't cry. She asked if the chair was real. I didn't understand. "What chair?" I asked. "The one she sat in," she whispered. "The judge's chair." "Did she really sit there after—" I nodded once. Lyra looked away. I knew then it wasn't just about the voltage. It was about the performance, the pageantry. Marla hadn't just hurt her. She'd humiliated her. And she'd done it in front of everyone we lived next to. The next morning, a letter was already taped to our front door. Notice of Leanne escalation. According to the HOA, our disruption of order during a formal compliance review triggered Clause 9.7b, which enabled immediate financial penalties. Marla had signed it herself, same stylized signature she used on the fake court documents, all sealed with the HOA's meaningless red stamp. That was when I stopped being stunned. That was when I got mad. I went back to the footage. Not the HOA's public recording, but the internal archival channels from the building's original security system. I hadn't touched them in years, but I still remembered the default node mapping, and then I saw it. The front-facing footage, the one Marla had likely edited for distribution, cut out the most important 2 seconds. The moment her hand reached under the desk. The moment her fingers wrapped around the taser. The sound spike was trimmed. The timestamp looked misaligned by a fraction of a second. I'd written that code. I knew what unedited footage should look like, and that timestamp, it wasn't just wrong, it had been re-rendered without the watermarking protocol, meaning someone had used an unauthorized clone of my original courtroom sim to record, edit, and replace the real feed. I ran a checksum across the metadata. The system didn't lie. She'd faked the footage, or someone had done it for her. I stared at the screen for a long time, hands clenched in my lap, heat rising in my chest. If she was willing to tase a pregnant woman and then sit in a judge's chair with faked footage to back her up, then I was done waiting for someone else to fix it. I'd built these tools for truth. Now I was going to use them to make sure the lie unraveled, frame by frame, and when it did, I'd make sure Marla never sat in that chair again. I found Karen 2 days later, standing outside the HOA maintenance shed, clipboard in hand, watching 2 contractors unload mulch like it was the only thing that mattered in the world. He didn't notice me at first, not until I stepped into his shadow. He looked up, eyes tired, tie crooked, shoulders tight like he hadn't slept since the hearing. "Calum," he said stiffly. "I know what she did," I replied, "and I know you know it too." He didn't argue, didn't pretend, just glanced down at his clipboard like it might offer an escape route. "She showed no remorse, I said, quieter now. Not for the taser, not for the escalation letter, not for the fact my wife, my pregnant wife, was hospitalized for 2 days because of her. He nodded once, not an agreement, a reflex, the kind you give when you're cornered by truth. "I'm not asking you to risk your position," I added, "but I need to know, did she alter the feed?" That got a reaction. His hand tightened around the pen in his fingers until it cracked. Plastic split down the side. "I'm not the one who pulls footage," he said, voice low. "That's all her. She logs into the dashboard with a board override code. She tells the secretary it's for Internal legal archiving. Nobody questions her. Not after last year. Last year? I asked. He hesitated again. Something flickered behind his eyes. Shame, maybe, or fear. There was another incident, he murmured. Before your wife, another woman, Amina Hale. She filed a noise complaint about construction Marla approved without community notice. Next week, she's hit with a fine for spitting on HOA property based on footage that cut out just before the so-called act. Did anyone verify it? I asked. No one dared. And you? I told myself it wasn't my place. He was trembling now, just slightly. A tremor in the fingers, like holding something in too long. Like maybe he'd finally reached his breaking point and didn't know what to do with it. I've seen the logs, Caleb, he finally whispered, and I didn't sign off on half the disbursements she's processed. But she tells the board the treasurer position is just ceremonial now. She holds all access. I exhaled slowly. That confirmed what I suspected. Marla had cut off everyone else's access to the audit trail. That meant she was both the author and the editor of every record in the system. But it also meant something more valuable. She was the only one who could have altered the video. And if she used my system clone, if the digital fingerprints aligned, I could prove it. You still have access to the budget breakdowns? I asked. He looked around, unsure. Not to everything. She moved the real logs off the cloud node and onto a local backup system in the HOA office. But I have the maintenance expense line items. Why? Because I want to know if HOA funds bought that taser, I said. He blinked. You think... She brought it in like it was standard procedure. I want to know if she filed it as community security equipment. He looked down at his clipboard again, then slowly pulled a crumpled invoice from the bottom. It had been folded multiple times, almost, torn at the corner, but the text was clear enough. Line item 48, compliance deterrent device, $296.88, self-authorized. I stared at it. So she had bought the weapon with HOA money. No board approval, no resident vote. Just a single line, buried under landscaping and trash collection fees. She's been padding reports for months, Desh said, voice hollow. I kept telling myself it was just arrogance, that she'd like to run the show. But after what she did to Lyra, he trailed off. Will you testify to this? I asked. Eventually. He didn't answer, but he didn't say no. As I turned to leave, I stopped by the edge of the path and looked back. Desh hadn't moved. He was still staring at the invoice like it had become heavier in his hands. He didn't need to speak. I already knew what that silence meant. His loyalty was cracking, and Marla wouldn't see it coming. 3 days after the incident, I got another notice, this time hand-delivered by a young board volunteer who couldn't look me in the eye. The envelope wasn't HOA branded, no seal, no header, just a sheet of thick paper and bold text that read, "Final warning, pattern of hostile behavior will result in property reclassification." Reclassification, that was their newest word. A quiet threat dressed as procedure. The letter claimed my continued disruption of board order and verbal aggression toward HOA personnel, placed my property under review for revocation of Tier 1 privileges. In simpler terms, they were threatening to strip my home's access to shared amenities, parking permits, guest codes, lake access, under a bylaw they hadn't used in years. Lyra read the letter in silence, one hand resting over her belly. "They're trying to make us feel like strangers," she whispered. I nodded, but didn't answer. My fingers were already moving, flipping back to the video logs. I hadn't stopped combing through them since the night we came home from the hospital. Each frame was its own betrayal, a copy of my own system, mutated into a weapon I never intended. That morning, I focused on the moments leading up to the taser. The public HOA video, what was shared on the community server, had the familiar courtroom angle, front-facing, fixed frame, slightly high for authority. But it was too clean, too centered. In the metadata, the audio layer was flattened. The waveform looked compressed, no overlapping ambient tracks, which my system always kept for integrity comparison. But when I ran the same timestamp through a test instance of my original software, the comparison flagged something that chilled me. The background channel, the one used to verify authenticity, was completely missing, replaced with a static loop. That loop didn't exist in my original codebase. Someone had patched it in. She didn't just clone my interface, she corrupted its architecture. I needed to see the local feed, the backup footage stored on the building's interior surveillance system, the one Marla never touched because it wasn't under her control. But access required a technician's passcode, and the original code hadn't been used since before the board remodel. I called CityLink Tech, the private contractor that had installed the base layer before Marla's reign. The technician I got was young, polite, and a little suspicious when I asked for archived credentials. "Sir, we're not authorized to release admin codes to residents," he said. "I'm not asking as a resident," I told him. "I'm the original firmware author on the Courtroom sim Marla Givens cloned. She's currently using it to edit live evidence in a civil violation proceeding." There was a pause, then typing. Lots of it. Finally, he sighed. "Her system's not even licensed. There's no update key. I should report her." "I'm already working on that, but I need the failover ID on the original boathouse security panel." Another pause. He read me a 10-digit numeric string. "Use that on the manual keypad at the west utility entrance. You'll only get 10 minutes of access before the auto lockout kicks in. That firmware hasn't been updated since 2020. I wrote it down. The west entrance was tucked behind the utility shed, down a gravel path no one used anymore. When I reached it that night, I had a flashlight in one hand and the printed code in the other. The door wasn't locked, just shut tight from humidity and years of neglect. Inside, the air was stale and warm. The control panel glowed dimly beside the breaker box, still active but buried beneath a sheet of dust. I keyed in the override, and the interface blinked to life. The backup server still had fragments of the original footage, raw, uncompressed, untouched, and in one frame, just milliseconds before Marla raised the taser, her hand moved. Not in fear, but with preparation. Smooth, practiced. That was the difference. Intent. Frame by frame, I overlaid the raw data against her broadcast version. The discrepancy wasn't small. It was a full second of cut time, enough to erase the flicker of decision, enough to make it look like self-defense, but it wasn't. I extracted the files, locked them behind 3 redundancies, and backed them up to an off-grid drive. If I was right, this wasn't just tampering. It was manufactured justification. And if she'd done it once, she'd done it before. I didn't sleep that night. My mind ran like a server under siege, parsing frame data and metadata hashes, tracking packet timestamps like breadcrumbs through a forest set on fire. I kept looping the same 3 seconds. The real footage, the one from the boathouse archive, told the truth plainly. Marla's hand didn't flinch. It reached. She hadn't acted in fear. She'd decided. And that 1-second clip didn't just contradict her story. It exposed the method. The override in her pirated system wasn't just crude mimicry. It had her fingerprints all over it. The exact time she muted the secondary channel, the specific patch she used to reroute the recording layer. It wasn't someone else. It was her, and I had her sequence ID to prove it. She'd modified the cloned firmware with a tag labeled M. Givens admin patch dis 4B. She'd signed her tampering. I took the data offline, saved it to a secure node only I could access, then made 2 physical copies. One I hid inside the gutted casing of an old fiber modem. The other I sealed inside a Mylar bag and slipped it into Lyra's emergency go bag beneath the compression socks and prenatal vitamins. By morning, I had something more valuable than evidence. I had a trail. Marla hadn't just doctored a video, she'd built a pattern. And if I could find another instance, something older, something that matched her digital signature, I could destroy her entire web of false authority. I didn't need gossip, I needed timestamps. I remembered what Desh said about the woman who got fined last year, Amina Hale. I found her number buried in an old community contact PDF. She answered on the second ring, suspicious and sharp. "I'm not signing any petition," she snapped. "I'm not calling about signatures," I said. "I'm calling about what Marla did to you last summer." Silence. Then, quieter. "Who is this?" "Calum Drex. My wife's the one Marla tased last week." The pause that followed was longer, but not cold. It was careful. "She's the one who sat in the chair, isn't she?" Amina asked. Afterward, like it was some performance. "She's been sitting in that chair long before she bought it." Amina gave a dry, humorless laugh. "You sound like you know more than you're saying." "I do. I have something that proves she altered footage. I think she did the same thing to you." Her voice dropped low. "She said I spat on her flowers. claimed the video showed it, but when I asked for a copy, she said it was sealed for community privacy. I lost access to the lake dock that month. Would you be willing to let me cross-check that violation? I think the same digital signature she used in Lyra's footage might be in your file, too. There was a long breath on the other end. Come by tonight, she said, but don't park out front. Her house was on the far end of the cul-de-sac, trimmed hedges and symmetrical flower beds masking the bitterness that had taken root. She met me at the back gate, hair tied up, eyes sharp behind thin frame glasses. She looked like someone who'd been burned and never stopped smelling the smoke. She handed me the violation letter and a thumb drive. I got this from a kid who used to do video backups for the HOA, she said. He gave me a copy of the public footage they used against me. I've never been able to prove anything with it. I didn't promise anything, just took the drive and nodded. Back home, I ran a forensic compare. The file structure was identical to the patched clone Marla had used against Lyra. Same missing ambient layer. Same timestamp compression at key interaction points. Same rogue admin tag in the metadata. M. Givens, Josh admin patch, enter 3A. It wasn't just a pattern, it was a version history. Each tampered file was a fingerprint, and Marla had been leaving them behind like breadcrumbs, too arrogant to think anyone would check her work. The deeper I dug, the more I realized something that chilled me. She wasn't just faking compliance. She was manufacturing crimes. And she'd gotten away with it. Again and again. The next morning, I found Marla standing in front of our driveway, clipboard in one hand, sunglasses reflecting the rising sun off her smug face like it was all staged. A man stood beside her, tall, wiry, uniformed in a private security outfit that hadn't been cleared through any HOA budget meeting I'd seen. "This is your last warning," she said flatly as I stepped outside. "Refusal to comply with the HOA's protective ordinance will result in an emergency vote to restrict your access to all community assets. That includes water, parking, and digital access." "Protective ordinance?" I asked, stepping closer. She tapped her clipboard. Section 11D. Non-cooperative residents deemed disruptive or dangerous to board order may be subject to safety provisions, including temporary fencing, camera blackouts, and private monitoring. I laughed, once, dry. "That's not a law. That's a tantrum printed on letterhead." Marla didn't flinch. The security guy stepped forward, blocking the walk to my garage. "If I see you tampering with community systems again, Mr. Drex, I'll file for a full board injunction," she added. "You're no longer permitted within 30 feet of shared infrastructure." That was her move, legal theater. If she couldn't prove anything, she'd fake boundaries and call them policy. "You're bluffing," I said. She leaned in. "Then test me." I didn't answer. I just stared at the sunglasses covering her eyes. I wondered if she knew how transparent she'd become. The moment they left, I opened my laptop and started scripting. If she was going to invent rules, I'd answer with code. It took me 5 hours to build the prototype. I constructed a local forensic overlay that could auto-detect patch signatures inside any footage exported from the modified interface. Every edit she'd made, every second cut, every muted channel, every compression artifact would be lit up like a battlefield flare. Then I ran it on the Amina file, then the Lyra footage. Then, for the hell of it, I requested the public video from another past violation, an old neighbor named Richard Claymore, cited last year for verbal assault against Marla during a spring HOA event. He'd moved out weeks later, never told anyone why. I found the footage archived in a community email, backup, buried under shared Google Drive links that no one ever cleaned out. Ran it through the patch detector. Same missing ambient layer, same fake timestamp compression, same digital fingerprint. M. Givens, Josh, admin, patch S2F. She'd done it again, and no one had stopped her. I stood in the middle of my living room, staring at the pattern forming across the screen like the beginning of a criminal enterprise. Only this wasn't someone embezzling funds or filing false maintenance claims. Marla was creating false violations to exert control, and every one of them shared her digital trail. This wasn't policy abuse. It was manufactured authority. It was fraud. And for the first time since that taser hit Lyra's side, I knew exactly what I had to do. I opened a secure tunnel to an off-site archive I maintained from my court tech days. Inside it were older courtroom firmware builds, clean and audit tested, stored with source files and uncorrupted watermark protocols. I began adapting them, repurposing one into a side-by-side verification tool. If I could show the board, or better yet, the residents themselves, a direct comparison between real and falsified footage, I wouldn't need to argue. They'd see it, every lie, every edit, every illusion Marla built to convince the neighborhood she was judge, jury, and God. Lyra came into the room as I compiled the first test video. She didn't say anything, just watched me for a long moment. "You're doing it, aren't you?" she asked quietly. I nodded. "They won't be able to ignore it once it's live." Her hand rested on her stomach again. I knew she still carried the weight of that hearing, in more ways than one. "I don't want her arrested," she said finally. "I just want her out of our lives. I can't promise the first won't happen if I do this right," I said. She didn't respond, but she didn't stop me. By the time night fell, the prototype was finished. The interface was crude, but the overlay was clean. One more tampered video, and I could prove a pattern of deliberate digital manipulation tied directly to Marla's admin patches. I didn't need a court yet. I just needed one moment to make the lie unravel publicly. That moment was coming, and I was ready. The doorbell rang just before midnight. I'd been hunched over the second overlay test, refining color mapping on the compression anomalies. My eyes were glassy, my wrists aching, but the knock pulled me back fast. I opened the door and found Desh Corin standing there in a wrinkled button-down, no clipboard this time, just a small brown envelope clutched in both hands like it was radioactive. He didn't say anything at first, just looked past me into the living room, where my monitors glowed softly in the dark. Then he exhaled, stepped in, and said, "I'm not good at this part." I didn't need to ask what he meant. He held out the envelope. "You'll know what to do with it." Inside were 3 things. 1, a printed log of internal HOA expense transactions from the last 14 months, ones the public treasurer reports never showed. 2, a USB drive. 3, a note in Desh's handwriting. It read, "This version is unaltered. Only 3 people ever had this access level. I've removed mine." I looked up. Desh was already pacing near the front window, hands tight behind his back. She's been using discretionary budget lines to fund purchases she categorizes under community safety enhancement. "Like the taser," I said. He nodded. "And the mock courtroom furniture, the robes, the security cameras. Even the gavel was tagged as symbolic enforcement device. She's been stacking power in plain sight." I clicked open the USB. Inside was a cache of internal surveillance logs, far more than what the HOA had ever made public. Desh had bypassed the real-time edit layer. The footage here was raw, messy, but authentic. And Marla didn't know it existed. One clip stood out. I clicked it. It was from 3 months ago. A man in his 50s, Mr. Canwell, a retiree who always wore orthopedic sandals, stood in front of the board table during a compliance check about fence paint. Marla accused him of mocking procedural authority. When he raised his hand to object, 2 of her volunteer bailiffs escorted him out. She declared a fine of $600 for hostile nonverbal intimidation. The official HOA footage only showed his exit. This one? It showed her smirk before she gave the nod. She wasn't protecting order, she was choreographing control. Desh finally sat down across from me, shoulders sunken. "She told me once," he said, "that leadership required image, that people don't follow fair, they follow fear, cloaked in fairness." I stared at him. "And you still stayed on the board?" "I thought she was just performative, dramatic. I didn't realize—" He shook his head. I was wrong. "Why now?" I asked. Desh glanced down at the envelope. "Because your wife didn't fight. She didn't even raise her voice. And Marla tased her anyway." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of it thick between us. Then I turned the monitor toward him. "You need to see this," I said. I played the side-by-side overlay, the one comparing Marla's edited video against the original boathouse backup, the moment of the taser, her calm, calculated reach, the missing ambient layer, the digital signature of the patch. Desh leaned forward slowly. "That's hers?" he asked. I nodded. "And this one?" "Yours," I said. "Clean, unmodified, logged from the legacy panel I accessed with a technician code. It's time-stamped, authenticated, matched to your financial log, showing the equipment wasn't registered for local editing. He rubbed his eyes. You have enough to bury her? He murmured. Not yet, I said. But close. He looked at me then, not with fear, but something else, guilt maybe, or relief. I'll back you when it's time, he said, but I need to do it right. No surprises, no ambushes. I understood. A man like Desh wouldn't show his hand unless he knew it would count. He stood to leave. Before he stepped out, he paused. She's planning something for the next quarterly meeting, something theatrical, bigger than a taser, more permanent. Then he left. I closed the door, locked it, and turned back to the screen. The file he gave me, it wasn't just support. It was the missing note I needed, a full breach of her system from someone inside. Now I had both ends, the tool she used to manipulate and the one she didn't know still existed. And when the meeting came, I'd make her watch as her chair collapsed beneath her. The next 3 days passed like a controlled burn. I cleared my calendar, rerouted all my client tickets to backup staff, and turned the house into a command post. Lyra didn't ask questions, not anymore. She'd seen enough to know this wasn't just about us. It was about every neighbor who had been humiliated and silenced, every family who paid a fine and wondered if they'd really done something wrong. It was about the false courtroom Marla had built, not just out of wood and laminate, but out of fear and illusion. And it was about the chair. I started building the final overlay, not just one comparison file, but a full presentation. Each segment would include side-by-side playback of original and tampered footage, along with real-time metadata parsing, watermark verification, and log anomalies. I embedded captions to explain every discrepancy in plain language, frame compression, audio flattening, cut time stamps. There'd be no tech jargon to hide behind, just the truth. My goal wasn't to convince the board. They were already complicit or afraid. My goal was to convince the people in the room, residents, observers, the ones who had only ever seen Marla's edited broadcasts. I added a secondary track to highlight her specific admin patch tags across all 3 cases. M. Givens, admin patch 92F, patch 93A, and patch 94B. Each edit was labeled with the day, the footage length change, and the exact line where audio tampering occurred. None of this was speculation. It was math, data, unarguable. Then I drafted the opening payload. I'd coded it into a lightweight shell executable, a simple file that, when dropped into a standard media player, would auto-split any HOA footage from the last year and flag edits based on embedded digital inconsistencies. It would be the first HOA forensic checker in the neighborhood. The irony wasn't lost on me. Late into the night, Lyra came into the room. She stood behind me as I ran the final test file. "Looks like a trial," she said softly. I paused the playback. "It is," I answered. Her hand touched my shoulder. "Is it enough?" "It has to be." She didn't push further, just leaned against the desk and watched as I formatted the final backups. 2 encrypted drives, mirrored and sealed. One would be planted in the community center's media server. The other, I'd carry on me. The quarterly meeting was scheduled for Friday. That gave me 48 hours, plenty of time to set the trap. I reached out to the community mailing list, not as Calum the husband or the HOA opponent, but as Calum Drex, systems analyst and civic tech consultant. I composed a message that read like a service bulletin. To all residents, in light of recent community questions regarding policy enforcement and footage validity, I'll be presenting a technical audit during the open comment section of the upcoming quarterly meeting. This demonstration will include original and edited video comparisons, with verifiable metadata differences and code-level identifiers. If you've ever received a citation you didn't understand, you might want to be there. CD. I didn't accuse, I invited. The replies came within hours, quiet RSVPs, a few anonymous forwards, a few questions. But no panic. Not yet. That night, I visited the community center. The place was locked, but that didn't matter. I wasn't there to break in. I was there to study. The media console Marla used for her hearings was connected to the building's projector system through a common I/O dock. HDMI input, single output channel, no authentication, perfect. I could preload the video to the console. All it would take was switching the input channel when the time came. A single press. I left without touching anything. Back home, I installed a kill switch trigger on my presentation file. If anyone tampered with it, even slightly, it would self-lock behind a code only I knew. By sunrise, every tool was in place. The footage, the logs, the overlays, the witnesses, the residents, and Desh. The only thing left was for Marla to show up and do what she always did. Perform. And when she did, I'd be ready to cut the stage lights and show the crowd what she'd really built behind the curtain. This wasn't going to be a meeting. It was going to be an unmasking. I arrived at the community center an hour before the quarterly meeting, wearing the same jacket I'd worn to Lyra's hospital discharge. The weight in the pocket wasn't a hospital discharge summary this time. It was a slim encrypted drive, the one that held everything. The overlays, the video logs, the admin tag trail, and the automated forensic validator. The lobby was already buzzing. Neighbors drifted in wearing polite tension like pressed collars, eye contact clipped, greetings brief. Most of them weren't there for free coffee or budget line items. They were there because of the message, because of the taser, because the seat Marla Givens called her throne had gone too far this time. Desh was already inside, standing near the refreshments with both hands clasped behind his back, like a man trying not to fold too early. His eyes found mine, and he gave a barely there nod. I didn't need more. The media console was unattended. I approached it like any technician would, neutral, methodical, unnoticed. The HDMI input was still wired into the ceiling-mounted projector. I popped the side panel, slid the drive into the data slot, and waited. 30 seconds later, the playback file synced, silent, invisible. The trap was set. I returned to my seat near the middle row, just far enough to be unthreatening, just close enough to see her eyes when it started. And then Marla walked in. She wasn't dressed like a board president. She was dressed like she always wanted to be seen. High collar, tailored slate gray jacket, no HOA badge, just the gold gavel pin gleaming at her throat. Authority as fashion. She took her seat at the elevated podium, the judge's chair, as if nothing had happened. No mention of Lyra, no mention of tasers, no remorse. Desh took his place 2 seats down, eyes forward. He looked like a man about to watch his own chains fall off. Marla cleared her throat and launched into the opening agenda. Landscaping violations, pet registration reminders, standard HOA sedation tactics. I waited. Let her get comfortable. At the 30-minute mark, she opened the floor for the community concerns portion. 3 hands went up. She acknowledged none of them. Instead, she looked at the back of the room where the AV operator usually sat during large meetings. But tonight, it was empty. She tapped her mic. We've received a request from a resident wishing to present technical information related to the HOA's digital systems. While this falls outside of our typical agenda, we will allow 5 minutes. You'll want to watch all 10, I said, standing up. Calm, even. She froze for just a beat. That microsecond of calculation. Then she leaned back and gestured toward the projector screen with theatrical generosity. Proceed. I walked to the console and tapped one key. The room dimmed as the projector flickered on. The first frame was Lyra, sitting in the mock courtroom, calm, still. Then the taser fired. The audio popped. Marla's voice issued the ruling. She sat in the judge's chair. A few neighbors gasped, not because they hadn't seen it, but because this version was different. Then the screen split, side-by-side view. Left, HOA version. Right, original footage from the legacy system. Same timestamp, same angle, different truth. On the right, the footage showed Marla reaching, calm, deliberate. The ambient audio played, her breathing, the rustle of papers, the exact moment the taser was drawn before any escalation. On the left, the moment cut, sanitized. The captions rolled underneath, concise and damning. 1.3 seconds removed from primary file. Ambient layer flattened. Admin patch detected. M. Givens, Jadmin, patch /4B. The silence in the room was total. I let the next segment play. Amina's footage. Then, Mr. Canwell's. 3 incidents, 3 altered files, 3 signatures, same woman. Marla didn't speak, she didn't move. Desh finally stood. I cross-verified those financial logs, he said, voice quiet but shaking. She used community funds to purchase equipment labeled as deterrents. The taser was just the latest. The final screen appeared. Pattern established, tampering confirmed, source verified, admin tag authenticated. Then the lights came back on. I didn't turn to look at her, because I didn't need to. The room was already doing it for me. Marla didn't move, not when the lights returned, not when the screen froze on her signature embedded in the final frame, not when gasps turned into murmurs and murmurs into scattered outrage. She just sat there, upright, lips tight, fingers clenched around the arms of that oversized mock judicial chair, as if it had fused to her. Then finally she spoke. "This," she said slowly, gesturing toward the projector, "is a distortion, a manipulated smear campaign, an abuse of technical resources by a resident with a personal grudge." But her voice didn't land the way it usually did. There was no gravity in it anymore. Someone from the back laughed, sharp and bitter. "Then prove it," I said. "Let's run it again. We can bring in a third-party analyst. Anyone in here work in digital forensics?" A woman near the front raised her hand. "I do. Broward County Cyber Division." And just like that, the air shifted. Marla stood. "These are confidential board matters, private internal disciplinary tools that are not subject to public parsing. We have procedures." "You tased a pregnant woman," said someone else. "She edited video of my husband," added another voice. "He was fined for threatening gestures during a landscaping dispute. That clip never looked right." "She fined me for excessive tone in a parking appeal," said an older man. "Told me the audio proved I was disrespectful." Each voice chipped away at her illusion. Desh cleared his throat, now standing fully. "For the record," he said, unfolding a printed ledger, "I'm submitting a motion to suspend the President's authority under HOA Charter subsection 7.3. Emergency ethical review. The financial discrepancies exceed threshold. The evidence of media tampering is now verifiable." "You don't have quorum," Marla hissed. Desh looked around. Nearly every board member was present, and 3 were already turning toward him. "You're not the only one who knows the rules," he said. Someone began clapping, awkwardly, then with purpose. Another neighbor stood, then another. Marla stepped back from the podium, like the room was tilting against her. "I built this system," she snapped. "I protected you. You think you want freedom? You want chaos. You want noise complaints and broken trash bins and lawn neglect. I gave you order." "No," I said, stepping forward. "You gave us fear, and you lied to justify it." For the first time, her face faltered. The door opened at the back. 2 uniformed city officers stepped in, flanked by a young woman with a badge clipped to her belt. Municipal Code Oversight Division. "Ma'am," the lead officer said, calm but firm, "we're here under directive from the county auditor's office. We've received flag documentation and unregistered compliance tools purchased with community funds. We're asking you to step outside for questioning." "You have no jurisdiction," she said, breath shallow. "This is HOA governed land under city annex. We have shared oversight." Her voice cracked. "I am the oversight." "You were." The room was dead silent. She didn't scream, didn't argue. She just turned, walked stiffly past the residents she once ruled, and exited with the officers. No cuffs, no shouting, just the sound of her heels clacking hollow across laminate and linoleum, and a door clicking shut behind her. Desh turned to the room, his voice steadier now. "Until a formal election can be held, I'm invoking emergency leadership continuity protocol. Effective immediately, all disciplinary reviews are suspended pending third-party audit." Applause rose, not raucous but steady. Controlled. For once the room felt real, no performance, no theater, just the hum of something shifting back into place. Lyra met me outside afterward, leaning against the car. Her expression said everything I needed. "You showed them," she said. I shook my head. "They saw it. I just held up the mirror." She smiled faintly and looked toward the building. "Think she'll be back?" "No," I said. "Not to that chair." We sat in the quiet, just the 2 of us. The chair was still in there, I knew. Empty now, no longer sacred, just furniture. But I also knew the footage would outlive it. The overlay, the log trails, the forensic markers, the truth. And that was something no one could erase. 3 days later, the chair was gone. No announcement, no ceremony. Just a blank space where it once sat, stripped of its artificial importance. The pedestal beneath it taken down with a power drill by the same maintenance team Marla had once hired to install it. Desh stood nearby while they worked, arms crossed, clipboard under one arm, not to monitor, just to witness. He didn't look proud. He looked relieved. I watched from the back of the room, unseen, unnoticed, just another resident now. And I liked it that way. The community hadn't fallen apart without Marla. Quite the opposite. In the days following the meeting, something strange had happened. Something that, for all her talk of order, she had never actually accomplished. The neighborhood started to feel like a community again. People began walking their dogs past each other without glancing over their shoulders. Someone replaced the broken solar lights along the North Trail, and no one argued about lumen limits or HOA-suggested fixtures. Kids chalked hopscotch on the sidewalks without parents standing guard. The air itself seemed to unclench. And then came the emails. I received the first one 2 days after the meeting. Subject line, violation appeal, footage discrepancy. It was from Mr. Claymore, the same man Marla had targeted last year. He'd attached his old violation letter and asked if I could run it through these validator overlay to confirm his suspicion. The footage, he said, had never quite made sense to him. I ran it. Same patch tag, same time jump, same flattened audio signature. I sent him the proof with a silent acknowledgement. You weren't crazy. She just made you feel like you were. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, 15 more residents had quietly dropped off USB drives, printed letters, even entire HOA violation packets at my door. Each one came with the same question. Can you check this too? I did. Every time. And every time, the story was the same. Manufactured infractions, digital edits, compliance tickets that didn't just stretch the truth, they erased it. Desh and I started building a repository. We called it the Audit Archive. Not official, not yet, but growing. Transparent, open source. Each entry labeled, tagged, and filed. We didn't ask for power, we asked for truth, and people came to see it. One neighbor, a retired software teacher, volunteered to help refine the interface. Another, a web developer who had kept her head down through the worst of Marla's reign, offered to build a public dashboard. We'd agreed on one rule: no resident data, no shaming, just facts. I never asked Lyra to help, but she did anyway. One night, I came into the living room and found her reviewing the footage again, the taser clip. Not crying, not panicking, just studying. I think we should show it one more time, she said. At the next meeting, not just for us, for everyone. I sat beside her. You sure? She nodded. I want them to remember what it looked like when it broke. That way they'll notice the cracks faster next time. We watched in silence, the moment playing again. Only this time, the fear was gone. The quarterly meeting after that was quiet, not empty, just quiet. No robes, no theatrics, no gavel, just chairs, tables, and residents speaking like people again. Desh stepped up to the podium, not a pedestal, just a simple folding table now, and began with a line that made a few people chuckle. No one's getting tased today. That's my promise. When it was my turn, I didn't bring any footage, just a folder. Inside were letters, residents sharing how they'd paid fines they didn't deserve, faced shame they couldn't explain, and sat in silence because someone made them doubt their own memory. I read 4 of them aloud. When I finished, I looked around. Not everyone clapped, some cried, but no one looked away. Afterward, someone quietly set a small wooden bench in the corner of the room, right where the chair used to be. No plaque, no label, just there. It wasn't about replacing the power. It was about undoing the weight of it. That chair had once been a throne of fear. Now it was gone, and in its place was space to breathe. By the following month, the story of Turnwood Bluffs was already spreading. Local reporters called it the neighborhood that exposed itself, a headline that sounded almost absurd until you realized it wasn't about scandal. It was about truth finally coming up for air. I spent most of those weeks in quiet places, behind monitors, in the small upstairs office overlooking the lake, the same room where I'd built the overlays, where I'd planned everything that came after the taser and the chair. Now, the equipment just hummed softly. No longer weapons, just tools again. Lyra would come in sometimes with tea, the baby's slow heartbeat audible on the monitor she wore. You should rest, she'd say every night. But her voice had light in it now. It no longer shook. I'd rest when I could, though part of me stayed tethered to that moment. The crackle of the taser, the silence that followed, the look on Marla's face when her own edits exposed her. I didn't feel triumphant when I thought of it, just finished. Like a system finally shutting down after years of overheating. Desh kept his promise. He led the board through a full reformation vote. Every resident was invited, every seat filled. The broken gavel sculpture out front had been taken apart piece by piece, the fragments set into a new mosaic installed near the entrance walkway. It spelled one word in black stone letters: balance. They asked me to attend the unveiling, but I stood back, half in the shade, half in the sunlight. It wasn't my moment. It belonged to everyone who'd sat silent while Marla performed her version of justice. It belonged to the ones who'd finally spoken up. After the ceremony, Desh approached me. He had a worn envelope in his hand. "She's being charged," he said quietly. 3 counts, misuse of funds, unlawful tampering with digital evidence, and aggravated assault. The footage went to the county attorney's office. "Will she serve time?" I asked. "They'll negotiate. She'll lose the license she never really had. Maybe probation, maybe a fine. But she won't come back here." He looked toward the water, expression unreadable. "Funny thing," he added. "Fear doesn't vanish when you remove its source. It lingers. You have to replace it with something." He left me the envelope. It contained the final court documents confirming Marla's removal from all civic duties. Her name, once printed at the top of every neighborhood notice, now appeared at the bottom of a termination order. When I went home, Lyra was sitting outside on the small bench by the lake. The same bench I'd restored, the one I'd built years ago from old driftwood my father left behind before he passed. It had survived every storm that hit this place. She smiled as I walked up. "They told me they're going to name the new community tech initiative after you," she said. "The Drex Protocol." I shook my head. "It was never about me." "No," she said, looking out at the reflection of the sunset on the lake. "It was about not letting people like her decide what's true." For a long time, we just sat there, watching the water ripple under the fading orange light. Every small wave felt like something leaving us. A ghost, a lie, a wound. In the weeks that followed, I taught a few residents how to maintain the audit software. They insisted on keeping it open source, accessible to anyone who wanted to learn. I agreed, on one condition: that it never be used for punishment again. Only transparency. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet and the hum of the servers lulls me towards sleep, I still see that empty chair in my mind. Not as something haunted, just hollow, power stripped away until it's nothing but wood and air. That's how justice should feel. Light, even, measured. We never did replace it with anything new. We left the space open, a reminder that authority without accountability always becomes theater, and that truth, when given a platform, doesn't need a gavel, it just needs witnesses. So, if you've ever lived under someone who thought rules made them untouchable, if you've ever watched power dress itself as order and call it community, remember this: it only takes one person to turn on the projector and make everyone see. Because silence keeps the chair upright, and truth pulls it out from under them. Subscribe and stay with us. Justice isn't loud, it's patient. It's the moment you stop looking away. Tell me, what injustice should we uncover next?